All right, let's dive right into this explainer. We're going way beyond just a simple plot summary of Edgar Allan Poe's absolute classic, The Telltale Heart. I mean, we all know the basic setup, right? A man goes mad, kills an old man because of his incredibly creepy eye, and then confesses when he thinks he hears the dead man's heart still beating under the floorboards. But today, we're actually going to get inside the mind of this murderer. We'll be looking through two really fascinating analytical lenses, historical context and modern psychoanalysis. Because as we'll see, Poe wasn't just writing a spooky horror story, he was actually writing a brilliant critique of the justice system and a surprisingly spot-on psychological profile. Just listen to the way he speaks. True, nervous, very, very dreadfully nervous I had been and am. But why will you say that I am mad? Right out of the gate, from that very first sentence, we're just yanked into this tense, super eerie atmosphere. The narrator is instantly on the defensive, he's wildly unreliable, and it feels like he's practically grabbing us by the collar to plead his case. But before we get completely swept up in all that frantic energy, we really need to take a step back and analytically break down what this confession actually is. So, that brings us to the madman's plea, a surface-level defense.
If you really think about the narrator's immediate defense, he's acting exactly as if he's sitting across from a psychiatrist, or maybe standing before a judge, actively trying to build a perfectly logical defense for his mental state. And the real paradox here is kind of wild. He fundamentally believes that his ability to calmly and meticulously describe a horrific crime is actual, undeniable proof that he's entirely sane. He claims his disease hasn't dulled his senses, but actually sharpened them, especially his hearing. He completely denies that this was some crime of passion or sudden confusion. Instead, he insists that his methodical planning is the ultimate proof of his sanity. But, as we sit here acting as the psychiatrist listening to him, we quickly realize that this absolute obsession with his own rationality is exactly what proves he's completely lost his mind.
Which leads us into the 1843 insanity defense. Poe's real-world satire.
Stepping back into the real world for a second, this story wasn't just some random, purely creative choice by Poe. He was actively critiquing a really controversial legal loophole that was introduced the exact same year this story was published, back in 1843. It was called the M'Naghten Rule, and it caused a profound shift in both law and psychology. It essentially declared that criminal punishment wasn't appropriate for someone who, because of insanity, couldn't tell right from wrong. And Poe saw the immense danger and, frankly, the hypocrisy in this. It's the terrifying idea that a cold, calculated, meticulously planned murder could potentially be completely pardoned just because the killer managed to convince a judge that his moral compass was broken.
This rule created a massive earthquake in the justice system. Before 1843, courts used what was called the wild beasts test. The law looked at things purely through a moral lens. Were you acting out of good or evil? But the M'Naghten Rule? It shifted the entire focus over to cognitive awareness. Did you consciously know right from wrong? And Poe demonstrates this controversy absolutely perfectly. He shifts the focus of his entire story away from the moral horror of the murder itself and instead obsesses entirely over the perpetrator's mental state. I mean, the narrator clearly doesn't care if the murder was evil. He literally only cares if you think he's insane.
All right, moving on to Freud and the vulture eye, a psychoanalytic breakdown. Having looked at the legal side of things, let's zoom all the way into the deepest analytical lens we have today, which is Freudian psychoanalysis. Modern academic sources, like the Dialogue Social Science Review, really help us treat this explainer like a true psychological profile. And when we apply Freud's concepts, it becomes super clear that The Telltale Heart is fundamentally a masterclass in repression, subconscious anxiety, and deeply hidden desires that the narrator just cannot control. What's truly fascinating is how neatly we can map this highly abstract Freudian theory directly onto the events of the story. Freud argued that our minds are basically split into three parts. First up, you have the id. That represents our primal, most basic urges. In the story, the id is the narrator's unexplainable, purely murderous desire to destroy the old man's eye. Second is the ego. That's the part that tries to balance those raw urges with reality. So the narrator's ego is his careful plotting, his constant rationalizations, and his desperate attempt to keep up a facade of sanity. And finally, you have the superego, our moral conscience and societal rules. In Poe's tale, the superego manifests as that hallucinated heartbeat. It's the crushing, unavoidable weight of his own repressed guilt. Let's dig a bit deeper into the ego's fragile logic, sanity as a mask. We are basically watching a deeply fragile mind desperately trying to apply cold, calculating logic to an entirely insane primal urge. I mean, just think about his step-by-step methodical approach here. It's like the ultimate Type A murderer's checklist. Step 1, he spends a full week being incredibly kind to the old man. Step 2, he sneaks into the room at exactly midnight, moving agonizingly slowly. And Step 3, he waits in absolute cunning silence. This perfectly illustrates the fragile ego at work. He's using extreme, obsessive organization to mask a total loss of internal control. He literally thinks that because he has a checklist and a strict schedule, he must be sane. But the reality, his mind is completely fractured.
And why exactly is he doing all this? He says, I made up my mind to take the life of the old man and thus rid myself of the eye forever. He claims he actually loves the old man, but he absolutely hates his vulture eye. Psychologically speaking, the narrator is using Freud's concept of projection. He's taking all of his own hidden insecurities, his self-hatred, and his deeply unconscious anxieties, and he's projecting them straight onto the old man's pale blue eye. So destroying the eye is really just a violent, totally misguided attempt to destroy the parts of himself that he just cannot face.
This brings us to the beating heart of guilt. The superego strikes back.
So here we are at the climax of the story. He actually commits the murder, hides the body perfectly under the floorboards, and then the police arrive to investigate a noise. But look at his behavior. He is practically bathing in absolute confidence. He smiles. He feels this wild audacity. He actually gives the cops a full tour of the house, completely convinced that they suspect absolutely nothing. His ego has successfully navigated the reality of the crime. In fact, he's so wildly confident that he grabs his own chair and places it directly over the hidden corpse just to chat with the officers. He truly believes he's pulled off the absolute perfect crime.
So we have to ask the ultimate psychological question here. Why confess? What on earth forces a man to suddenly tear up the floorboards, screaming out his own guilt, when he has entirely, completely gotten away with murder? The police are sitting right there. They suspect absolutely nothing.
Well, the answer is the sheer, overwhelming power of unconscious guilt. The ultimate punchline of Poe's masterpiece is that the deafening, hallucinated heartbeat ringing in the narrator's ears, it isn't the victim's heart at all. It's the narrator's own superego. It's his own repressed moral conscience violently demanding retribution. He tried to bury his guilt under the floorboards right alongside the body. But as Freud teaches us, repressed feelings never truly go away. They just come back louder, more demanding, and in this case, completely destructive. Which brings us to a final, maybe slightly uncomfortable thought to wrap up this explainer. The absolute genius of The Telltale Heart isn't just that it's a scary story about a madman. It's that it reflects the deeply universal human experience of guilt and repression. Sure, we might not be burying bodies under our floorboards, but we all repress our deepest anxieties, right? We all have parts of ourselves we try to hide away. So I'll leave you with this. When things get really quiet and your own internal superego starts knocking, what does your telltale heart sound like?